All right. So, Breaking Free, Peter Mellody's book. It's the workbook that goes with Facing Codependence. I've just started a group on it, and the first part of the book it looks at getting your history straight. The second part of the book says, right, now we've got your story. Let's look at how that childhood trauma impacted your life relationally. What do you do now in your adult life? The very first bit is about what was done to you. This is now what we do to others as a result. I'm a big believer in recovery books that you read every page, and I talked about it last night. Introductions, Codependence, Adult Adapted Children. In our Better Than, we don't have to read the introduction. We just read the meaty bits. But the introduction's cool, so I'm going to read it here because people, these days we talk about developmental trauma. The ACE study got us talking about adverse childhood experiences. The codependency word isn't sexy. It's also it was always hard to understand. So it's best defined by its symptoms. So now that you have a clearer picture of what went on in your childhood that created your codependence, the next part of the solution begins with identifying how the distorted internal habit patterns are operating in your life at the present. I see codependence, this is Pia writing, I see codependence as a disease of immaturity, rendering a person unable to experience appropriate levels of self-esteem, unable to set boundaries with other people, unable to own his or her own reality, and unable to take care of his or her needs or wants appropriately, and unable to express his or her reality moderately and at an age-appropriate level. That's codependency. I see the 5 core symptoms as developmental problems of maturation in this way. All children have to learn certain things to eventually become adults, emotionally and mentally, by the time their physical bodies mature. They must learn to esteem themselves, to have boundaries, to own their own reality, to take care of their needs and wants, to express themselves with moderation. When these functions are not developed or are developed dysfunctionally, emotional and mental maturity does not accompany physical maturity. Therefore, I often describe codependence as little people in big bodies. Those who suffer from codependence engage in dysfunctional, self-defeating patterns of appearing, thinking, feeling, and or behaving that prevent them from experiencing relationships and life fully as mature adults. As the result of codependence, we do not know how to relate functionally to ourselves. Many codependents wonder, who am I? Or are harsh, punitive, and neglectful towards themselves, or undisciplined and self-indulgent. We also do not know how to relate functionally to others, a spouse, children, co-workers, friends. As children, we do not know whether or not our caregivers are functional, but we assume they are. So if they are dysfunctional, shaming and insecure, and living with them seems pain-filled, lonely, and empty, or otherwise difficult, we assume it is due to our own defects. Since contact with major caregivers teaches us how to relate to others, the illness of codependence begins to develop when we are living with them. We come to believe that the emotional reactions and behaviors that are hallmarks of codependence are normal, and we continue to believe so as adults. Thus, as adult codependents, we do not recognize the silent, deadly, programmed illness of codependence operating in our lives. We codependents have adult-looking bodies, but we lack the internal habit patterns necessary to think, feel, and behave as adults. We have not matured properly to be at our own age level, so we are little people in great big bodies. To recognize and arrest codependence, we must become able to both experience and identify it as a disease, not normalcy. And then the first step goes on then to look at, let's look at those key things: self-esteem, boundaries, reality issues, needs and wants, and age-appropriate moderation. And as the first part of what we're powerless over, however we were impacted in those areas of development, that's the bit that we're powerless over. As a result of not addressing it, unmanageability occurs. Around self-esteem, we have negative control issues. I either feel controlled by you or I need to control you to feel safe. around the damaged boundaries. I'm going to have resentment issues and rage issues around that inability to live comfortably in my own reality and not know who I am. I'm going to be in a spiritual crisis. It's a term appears I really like. And if you don't relate to that, you probably don't have codependence. But for the people out there that do have those emotional overreactions, that spiritual crisis makes a lot of sense. It helps identify what happens. And then if we're really either too needy or needless and wantless, then we will see in our adult life the unmanageability of mental health issues, addiction issues, and physical illness. One of the things that came out of the ACE study was the fact, the physical symptoms, and just how painful the reality of that is. It's all over TED Talks and YouTube these days, but the fact that we die 10 to 15 years earlier, that we're more likely to have depression, anxiety, addiction issues, sexually transmitted diseases, it's through the roof. We suicide more. It's awful. And then to be able to, when we experience ourselves age appropriately, just intensely. So the first step goes on to look at how am I powerless, and as a result of the powerlessness over my symptoms of codependency, how do I also then create unmanageability? And that's the next part of this book. So there's codependency defined. I'll try and put things up each week around what we're dealing with. I know in this group, I'm just actually getting to look at your own history. As Pia says, it feels normal. So when you really look at what's going on and the dysfunctional, you can have an inner critic, even make it impossible. Lots of people shared last night, I don't really want to come back, or I either don't think I need to be here, I'm not that bad, or I'm so bad I don't think I can do it. So the bit that we looked at in Pete Walker's book too is how to deal and tame with the inner critic. Now in this book I've gone through his flashbacks, how to deal with emotional flashbacks. But one of his hints there is the tips is working with the inner critic. He has a whole chapter in here on how to work with that inner critic that can actually just cripple us. I'll present that next time. But please tune in if you're out there and you're suffering. Codependence Anonymous, find this book, Breaking Free, and the book that it's based on, Facing Codependence. And if you can, do it with other people that are non-shaming and safe. That'll help you with it. Take care.
Well, I pray today, take this page